In academia, especially within biology and the social sciences, there's this idea called the hierarchy of dominance where members of a social group aggressively create a ranking system. Members on the top of the hierarchy would receive resources, while those on the bottom of the hierarchy would receive the leftovers or nothing. The idea of a hierarchy of dominance makes sense in biology. It doesn't make much sense in the social sciences, though. In the animal kingdom, for example, there isn't significant cognitive differences between members of an animal group. Also, lots of animals are actually incredibly aggressive and thus actually assert dominance over other animals. That's biology. In the social sciences, however, so humanity, there is significant cognitive differences between members of a group. Also, there isn't a need for aggression, thus asserted dominance in human societies. You can just use your brain to get on top. So what's my point in all of this? Well, the people within the social sciences have a habit of insinuating that those who have power and authority in human societies have gained that power and authority by asserting their dominance over others. For example, feminists, SJWs, etc. claim that the patriarchy exists, not because men earned power and authority, but because they think we've asserted our dominance through aggression like we're a bunch of animals. It's not that men use their brains to earn and create the stuff we have. No, that goes against their entire narrative. They think that men, like animals, take and oppress, i.e. dominate. The reality is, a hierarchy of dominance makes no sense in the human world, especially a modern world where we have free market systems and an individual can excel through the free market by using their brain. A hierarchy that does make sense for humans is the hierarchy of intelligence and industriousness. And in fact, there is a hierarchy of intelligence and industriousness between the sexes, or patriarchy. For example, for intelligence, in the paper titled Sex Differences and Variability in General Intelligence, researchers explain in the conclusion and future directions section that, quote, males were more heavily represented than females in distributions representing those with conditions that disrupt general intelligence. Thus, there was greater variability among males than among females at the low ends of the overall distributions of general intelligence. The differences in variability were smaller, but there were also greater variability among males at the high ends of the overall distributions of general intelligence. And for industriousness, according to Stanford's business school, the reason why there are more men in higher positions of power is because men work harder and are more ambitious. There you have it, folks. The positions of power and authority men have are earned or created through intelligence and industriousness. Let me break it down. The reason why the patriarchy exists is because, let's face it, men are on average more industrious compared to women. We tend to work longer hours compared to women. We tend to work in more grueling conditions. We tend to be the half of the human race that actually builds, maintains, and expands nations and empires. I mean, to speak very frankly, men are also smarter and dumber than women. You know, there's a lot of stupid men out there who are on the lower end of intelligence. There's also a lot of men who are on the higher ends of intelligence, whereas women tend to hover around the average. That's why men tend to be at the very top of the hierarchy and also at the very end of the hierarchy. Men are more industrious, but also there are more men in a very technical sense, so IQ, that are vastly smarter than the rest of us. It's important to understand these statistical averages. They often express themselves in strange ways. Look at Google, for example. The hiring rate for a tech job at Google is said to be 0.2%. It's very competitive. It's more competitive than Stanford or Harvard. So as you can imagine, because there tends to be more men on the higher ends of intelligence than women, there would be more men working at Google, especially since the lower the variance, the more luck doesn't actually factor, more that skill factors. And yet, instead of accepting the hard truth that women are not on the higher ends of intelligence on average compared to men, and therefore won't be able to work at Google as much as men do, the people at Google buy into the narrative that men, like animals, have asserted our place in the hierarchy of dominance instead of earning it in the hierarchy of intelligence and industriousness. They bought into the lie of social science. And sadly, they fired an employee, James Damore, for vaguely suggesting it in a memo. And by vaguely suggesting it, I mean vaguely, because he doesn't seem to use the frank language that I use within this video. In his memo, he starts off by saying buzzwords like, quote, I value diversity and inclusion. I'm not denying that sexism exists. I don't endorse using these stereotypes. But then he said this, which sort of got him in trouble, quote, when addressing the gap in representation in the population, we need to look at the population level differences and distributions. He could be suggesting intelligence or industriousness. He may not be, though. But then finally, he goes on to say this, which really got in trouble with Google. Quote, we always ask, why we don't see women in top positions, but we never ask why we see so many men in these jobs. These positions often require long, stressful hours that may not be worth it if you want a well-balanced life and a fulfilling life. He, of course, seems to be suggesting that women are not as industrious as men are, at least within the workplace. And for that, he got fired. For arguing the truth, he got fired. For arguing the truth in an albeit vague way, Google fired him because they bought into the lie rooted in the hierarchy of dominance that the social sciences have perpetuated onto society. I wish he would have spoken very frankly, like the way I am right now, and said women are not in the higher ends of intelligence on average. They're not as industrious as men are on average, and therefore, not all of them are going to work in Google. There's going to be a lot less women working in Google than men. But he didn't say that. He didn't speak frankly, and yet he still got fired for it. Look, social justice warriors, feminists, social scientists, there's no such thing as a hierarchy of dominance in the human world. There's only hierarchies of intelligence and industriousness. And no matter how many people you fire, no matter how many rules you impose, no matter how many quotas you have, you can't change reality. You can't change the fact that men are on the top because they earned to be on the top. We are more industrious. Also, some of us are more intelligent than the vast majority of the population. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of patriarchy, by the way. It's a patriarchy of competence. I'm going to end off this video by saying this. Another James Damore who vaguely points out the obvious will come. You'll fire him. You'll say a bunch of flowery words in response. You might even have another quota. Might even place another quota or affirmative actions or whatever you guys do. But nothing will change. Facts are facts. That's just the world we live in. Face reality head on. I'm Jay Feza from Rebel.media. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe to Rebel.media. And please, if you hate Google's censorship of conservative content creators, please go to theycan'tstopus.com.